Chapters 15, The Human Race. As chivalric humanism is concerned with humans, it is important to define what is meant by the word humanity. Humanity is the collective whole of the human species, of which there is but one human species. That there is only one human species is supported by science. Now, the idea that there are numerous human races is what is called racism. This is because racism is predicted on the idea that there are extremely biologically diverse groups of humans who possess greater genetic differences than similarity with other humans. Yet within any group of humans there is more genetic similarity than there is difference. Regardless of whether our ancestry is ethnically Asian or African or Caucasian or so on, none of this ethnic variance makes up the majority of our genetic makeup. Even Caucasians and Africans, who many people think are very different races, actually have a higher degree of genetic similarity than they have differences. This is the objective truth, for all scientific research we have done into humans can find no evidence of large clusters of people that are principally homogeneous within and heterogeneous between. Such a group doesn't appear in any human ethnic group, and such a group is necessary in order for the biological definition of a race to be established. Therefore, there are no human races. Ethnic groups can be more accurately understood as extended familial groups. This is largely a consequence of the historically widespread practice of cousin marriages practiced by nearly every human civilization up until the modern time, and even still persists in some pockets of the world even today. After a population of humans who have practiced this type of incestuous breeding persist, certain traits such as facial bone structures become very common in a large population of people who may not be traceable to common ancestors through preserved records, but we must keep in mind that present-day ethnic groups took tens of thousands of years to develop. Due to globalization and modern transportation technologies making it possible to travel thousands of miles in a matter of hours, at present we are witnessing far more procreation between people outside of historical ethnic groups than previous generations of humans practiced. Ancestry and race should therefore not be confused for the same concept. If there is no such thing as human races, why then does the belief exist? This is because certain humans in the past, ignorant about science and biology, invented the idea of human races based on observations of differences such as skin color and cultural behavior in certain groups of humans. Because the idea is old, racism has endured as a concept in society, even though human races cannot be defined biologically. People sometimes focus on physical traits as evidence of human races, but this is a misunderstanding of what is observed. It is important to remember that even if our observations are correct, the explanations we make for those observations can be wrong. This is the case with the idea of human races. Physical traits only showcase how a person is related to a larger population group, and this is not the same as race. When an anthropologist looks at human remains and tries to date them, the anthropologist is not determining race so much as they are trying to place the remains within the continuum of gradual change that is human bone structure. Over generations of population descent, it is possible to notice certain physiological patterns that appear in human appearance, but this is not the same thing as race. Those looking for scientific research that proves human races do not exist should examine Richard Lewontin's paper The Apportionment of Human Diversity. Published in 1972, Lewontin identified that most of the variation within human populations is found within local geographic groups, and differences attributable to traditional race groups are but a minor part of human genetic variability. That is, there is less than 15% genetic variance between individual humans, and most people have 85% genetic commonality with any other human alive today regardless of their ancestral descent. Lewontin's research demonstrated there is no biological support for the ideological projection of human races. There is no such thing as a set of genes that belongs exclusively to one group and not to another. Even concerning the matter of skin color, albinos can appear within any human ethnic group as a mutation. The complexity of human biological diversity simply cannot be reduced to such a simplistic explanation as the delusional idea of race. We must abandon it, largely because it is not accurate, but also because the idea of human races causes unnecessary social conflicts. To further add to this subject, the National Human Genome Research Institute, NURI, conducted research that determined all human beings are 99.9% identical in their genetic makeup, research findings based on completion of the Human Genome Project that finalized in 2003, which identified all of the genes in the human genome. This latter research is more accurate than Lewontin's work, yet provides further support for his conclusion that human races do not actually exist. Yet just as with Lewontin's research, the information has not been embraced by many sociologists, who instead promote anti-scientific frameworks such as critical race theory and ignore this scientific research in their entirety because it does not suit their narratives. This is in my opinion because these sociologists need people to continue to believe in the myth of human races in order for their narratives to work. This is not solely pushed by critical race theory proponents, but also by forensic anthropologists who rely heavily on cranial measurements to determine ethnic origin, instead of relying on far more accurate genetic information. The important thing is to see not how we are different, but in how we are similar. Human genetic diversity is not so diverse that traits like stronger or weaker or taller or shorter or smarter or dumber can be inferred by ethnic descent alone. You cannot collapse human diversity into a few discrete categories like those labels. Furthermore, there is no scientific evidence of specific traits a person is more or less likely to have simply because of their ethnic heritage beyond perhaps skin color and some cranial characteristics, which is determined by a small number of genes in comparison to the majority of genes a person has, and these traits would more accurately be considered familial traits than races. It is more correct to say a person has certain ethnic traits in common with the people they descend from, and the idea of race and the use of the word race should be dropped in discussions related to human biodiversity, as it is inaccurate. Furthermore, while it is possible to identify what skin color a person is based on their genetics, we cannot affirm other genes as being associated with the gene for skin color. For example, carrying the gene to determine skin color is unrelated to other genes responsible for things related to the health and intelligence of the person. Racism in academia that masquerades as science. I grew up in the United States of America, and as a citizen it is common to believe the founders of our country were perfectly enlightened people who framed a utopian society. Yet the reality of history is the framers of the American Constitution did not outlaw slavery in order to make their noblest ideas come to fruition in their own lifetime. It would take 2 centuries for racism to be wholly recognized as evil by the American federal government, but it will take several more for society itself to fully abandon the very concept. It persists in numerous forms, masquerading as both pseudoscience and religion, and I fear it will not be completely stamped out during my own lifetime despite even the best of my own efforts. Tragically, in my time it has become common for our public institutions of learning to be administered by people who adopt ethnic and gender solidarity ideologies which are as sexist and racist as the very hate organizations they claim to oppose while labeling themselves as anti-racists, but really they are just another form of racist. For example, the radical ideology of critical race theory is taught at American law schools as a legal framework that assumes Caucasian people operate as a group to suppress people of other ethnicities using the law in order to maintain so-called racial power, which is supposed to be some kind of power collectively shared by Caucasian peoples. While white supremacists were able to seize political control in the past, since the enactment of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 this kind of behavior has been outlawed and is now heavily penalized within the American legal system, which actively works to ensure the mechanisms of government are not used to discriminate a person based on ethnicity. Furthermore, critical race theorists endorse the idea that people who are economically better off than others cannot relate to poor people, which is a belief based on nothing factual. An individual's income does not determine that person's capacity for empathy, rather it is that an individual's empathy is determined by the structure of their morality. This makes critical race theory nothing more than a baseless conspiracy theory believed not because there is evidence for it but rather because it encourages the racist ideologies of its adherents. The ideas are racist for two main reasons. Firstly, it blames one ethnic group, Caucasians, for most of the problems facing other ethnic groups, and secondly, it creates the perception that being non-Caucasian is some kind of disability in society that can make it impossible for a person to improve their social status the same ways that a Caucasian person can. Therefore, critical race theory is an inherently racist ideology which contradicts its stated goals. Unlike objective and legitimate academic thought, critical race theory has an open activist agenda with an emphasis on storytelling and personal experience. It exists solely to allow the adherent to feel they are righting perceived wrongs which may in fact not exist at all. Furthermore, critical race theory is built on making broad assumptions for another person's reasons behind certain behavior the critical race theorist dislikes. Worse, critical race theory actively promotes the idea of human races and that special legal actions must be taken to protect racial minorities, when in actuality such mechanisms would not be necessary if advocates fought to end the belief in the concept of human race altogether. In actual practice, the creation of special laws to harshly punish crimes motivated by racism or other kinds of discrimination only serve to promote the idea in society that races exist and that people are at a disadvantage because of these non-existent races. Essentially, the continual belief in races perpetrates discrimination against those imagined to belong to races. People would stop discriminating along racial lines if they ceased believing in the very concept of human races, yet the proponents of critical race theory ignore this because it would require them to abandon their own racist ideologies, too. In addition to critical race theory, there are similar ideologies which promote the viewpoint that simply being Caucasian awards a person an elevated status in society. The idea of so-called white privilege is itself rooted in racism, for it belittles the difficulties faced by light-skinned people as insignificant compared to those of dark-skinned people. This belittling is no different than the kind which those who hold prejudices against dark-skinned people engage in. The mental gymnastics required to convince oneself that they can combat racism with a different brand of racism are impressive, and the scope of irrationality required to avoid seeing the obvious contradictions in the beliefs. Impressive as it may be in the sheer scope of the delusion, it is not a beneficial belief for the adherent or humanity as a whole. It is nothing more than self-destructive nonsense. It would be wise for schools to prohibit the offering of courses that advocate ethnic solidarity and which discourage pupils from seeing other humans as individuals belonging to the same species. These kinds of racist courses serve no benefit to society because they only promote certain racist ideas in order to combat other equally terrible racist ideas. As they only exchange one wrong idea for another wrong idea, the promotion of any racist idea should be eliminated completely from the grounds of academia, and any so-called instructor of such ideology should be seen plainly as they are, professors of racism who teach pseudo-scientific ideas that delude people and harm humanity.